Welcome, everyone. My name is Juan Carlos Lopez. I am the Director of Teaching and Learning at the Maple League of Universities. I'm coming to you from Mi'kma'ki, that is the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I say those words of my commitment to listen and listen and listen. A very dear colleague of mine says, once you are done listening, go back and listen and listen and listen again. I want to listen to learn about the truth. I want to learn about the truth of what had happened, what has happened, and what still happens in these lands. And with that true, I would like to move towards following the recommendations um, of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, move towards the colonization and reconciliation action, as another very dear colleague of mine says, uh, in these lands. I also would like to recognize that these lands I'm coming to you from have received several waves of people of African descent. That story in itself is very rich because the record, the official record is more than 300 years. But that first person that we have in record came as a translator between the colonizers and the Mi'kmaq. So you figure that there was contact before that for that translation to happen. So that in itself is also very interesting. And I do that in the same spirit of listening and listening and listening and listening and listening again and learning about what has happened, what still happens, and how we can move to a better future for everyone. And I do that in my position as an immigrant and a settler in these lands. So again, thank you everyone for coming today. We have a very fine speaker, and I'll just briefly introduce Sam, and then I will let Sam take it away with her sharing the screen and the presentation and all that, and I'll be on the back doing the chat and what have you. So Sam Reed is originally from Western New Finland and Labrador. I'm gonna move this to the front so that I'm looking at the camera and not to the side. And studied French literature at Mount Allison University and the University of Guelph before attending library school at Dalhousie University. Over the past 14 years, Sam has worked in a wide variety of sectors within the library field, at a national museum, in records management, archives, public libraries, school libraries, and now in an academic library. As a digital initiatives and data service librarian at San Francis Xavier University, she is committed to improving library services to undergrad students through the intersection of student-centered teaching practices and open education. So that is my formal introduction. But I will add that Sam and a group of educators from the Maple League of Universities. We spent last year together, and we worked in a micro certificate of teaching and learning. So we get a lot of time to talk about teaching, about learning, and we actually had the opportunity to meet together. So it is an immense pleasure for me to have Sam join us today to share her perspective and her knowledge. So with that, Sam, I'm gonna retrieve to the back of the room, and I will let you take it away from here. So thank you.
So hi everyone. I'm Sam Reed, and I'm working at Santa Fe as a librarian right now. Today I'm joining you from my home in Wikopiquit or Cobequid, where the bay runs far up, also known as Truro in Nova Scotia. And I do work in Antigonish several times per week, but today I have the opportunity to work from home. So over the past year and a half, my role as a librarian has been to serve St. FX as the OER facilitator, the Open Educational Resource Facilitator. But as with many of my librarian colleagues across Atlantic Canada, this is just one part of my overall position. But it's one that I find increasingly positive as it's an emerging practice in academia. And in the spirit of open education, I've actually remixed the title for this presentation from a few different Canadian sources. So I want to be fully transparent about that as well. So many of us in the room recognize that we are experiencing a paradigm shift in higher education at the moment, that many of you are redefining what we'd like university education to look like in Canada. And with all the new technologies and everything that's happening in the world politically, this can be overwhelming. But one way to address the overwhelm is to focus on the things we do have control over and things we can change. So, on this note, I want to set the stage for today's conversation and emphasize that what I'm here to do is encourage you to refocus the energy away from the final products of teaching and learning to the entire process in and of itself. And so what I'm about to present may include ideas, activities, and assessment that you already incorporate into your teaching practice. And if that's the case, then that's wonderful. Are there ways that we can take these ideas a step further with an open license, for example? And I'll get into that. My role is to make the adaptation, use, and reuse of OER easier for teaching faculty and staff. And I'm here to tell you that there are many ways to do that beyond just incorporating an open educational resource textbook.
What I was saying was that, incorporating an open educational resource textbook has been well covered in the Maple League presentations. And so I'm not really going to start with that topic today, but I encourage you to go back and look at the catalog of talks that have already been done on that topic. A lot of them by my predecessors both in my own institution and across the Maple League. So there's some good content there to check out. All right, so what am I going to talk about today? Well, I'm going to start with just giving a little bit of a refresher on Creative Commons licensing, because we can't really move forward with this conversation unless we have a basis on that topic. And next, I'm going to discuss a little bit of the background and theory on open pedagogy and open educational resource enabled pedagogy, focusing on disposable versus renewable assignments. And then I have a case study of Wikipedia as a possible place to engage students and yourself in this practice. I have a lot of ideas that I'm going to talk about throughout the talk as well. I have some ideas about how the academic library at your institution can further facilitate and support open education. And if possible, I hope to leave a few minutes at the end. So I do have a lot of content. I'm not sure how much it'll take. I just kept adding and adding to this presentation. So at some point, I just have to give it. All right. So the Knowledge Commons is sort of the basis beyond the Creative Commons licensing. And this refers to the information and data and content that is collectively owned and managed by a community of users, particularly over the internet. So what distinguishes a knowledge commons from a commons of shared physical resources, like the Halifax Commons pictured here, is that digital resources are non-subtractable. That means that multiple users can access the same digital resources with no effect on their quantity or their quality. The internet is kind of a global digital commons. And in our current era of digital communications, we have a commons of human-produced works. This cuts across the broad range of areas, including cultural heritage, education, research, technology, art, design, literature, entertainment, business, data, etc., etc. But it's not just about shared resources, it's also about the social practices and the values that manage them. Open is more than just a set of attributes to apply to content. It is a set of practices and values that achieve important real-world benefits for teachers and learners, whether that is as a means to save money on a costly textbook or to catalyze collaboration and innovation, or perhaps to expand educational opportunities to remote populations. We all benefit as a society and as a world when knowledge flows freely. So Creative Commons tools, these are the different licenses. There's a lot on this slide, but what I have presented here are the most open and permissible licenses you can adopt to your work, and then going down toward the more restrictive licenses. So there is some overlap between these licenses, so I'll just go through the main ideas behind them. So these are free and easy to use copyright licenses to provide a simple standardized way to give others permission to share and use your creative work on the conditions that you choose. So the public domain, you can decide directly to automatically include your work in the public domain, so there's no conditions whatsoever on distribution or remixing or anything at all. The next one down, the CC BY, that just means the attribution, so credit must be given to the creator. So this one is on all of the CC licenses that follow. And so this one does allow for commercial use. Then we have CC BY SA share alike. So adaptations must be shared under the same terms. And then non-commercial, so only non-commercial uses of the work are permitted. So then we combine NC and SA in the next one. And then the ND stands for no derivatives. So no derivatives or adaptations of the work are permitted. And so that means even translations sometimes. And then we have one that includes like no derivatives and non-commercial. So it's the most restrictive. But there are a few things to note here that licenses cannot be revoked, although I've since learned that it's possible to go from a more restrictive license to a lesser restrictive license. And of course, you must own or control the copyright of the work that you've created. And that's important to know because if you created the work in the scope of your employment, depending on your type of employment, you may not be the holder of the copyright. So I know there's an elephant in the room here, and this is all I'm going to say about it, but Creative Commons has recognized, of course, the disruptive force of artificial intelligence, and they are working to develop a set of what they're calling signals to include on your openly available work that indicates how AI can use the material in their training or not. I'm not going to talk much about that at all other than to mention it because they're still very much under development with that. But if you want to check it out, there's a link that I have. Hopefully it's going to get shared in the chat. And then I want to talk as well about the traditional knowledge labels. There are a few different types available. So the provenance, protocol, and I've shared the screenshot of the permission labels here. These are meant to be used with traditional indigenous knowledge, and they're actually meant to be selected and applied in collaboration with the community itself. So that sort of forces a collaborative relationship. If you are considering openly licensing material that contains traditional knowledge, it's important to consider these various licenses for sharing, for protocol, for provenance, and really take that into effect. So these are meant to look like the Creative Commons licenses on purpose. But basically, when it comes to how to apply these licenses to your work, well, you put your work in you make it available in some form or another, and then you add. You can use the Creative Commons selector tool. It's like a quiz that they'll use to help you select which one is most appropriate for your research. And then you insert a phrase like the one I've included here, like this work is openly licensed via this Creative Commons license. So it's that simple. And the Creative Commons licenses are they're sort of also the foundation for the 5 R's of openness in open educational resource publication. And I'm using the word openness here rather than the noun open because many of the scholars in this field do consider that word open to be a verb rather than a noun. And in case you didn't know, open educational resources are educational materials that are openly licensed, often and most often with Creative Commons licenses, and they're generally characterized by these 5 R's. So retain, reuse, revise, remix, and redistribute. And these concepts define the baseline for the creation and use of OER and more broadly, open pedagogy. But I want to say as well, and I'll probably say this again, that the use of OER is not the only pathway to open education for faculty members. For some, open pedagogy more broadly may constitute that path, and this is what we're going to talk about next. So what is open pedagogy? So we're going to apply some concepts that I'm going to talk about today that in a way that goes beyond just the use of OER in of itself. There are many definitions, but I think my favorite one was from Dr. Rajiv Jhangiani in 2019. He said that open pedagogy is an access-oriented commitment to learner-driven education. Right? So we have a couple different concepts in there, especially the learner-driven part. I'm going to talk a lot about that today. And then the access-oriented sort of implies the Creative Commons licensing that I just went over. Dr. Jhangiani is actually one of the foremost scholars in open education in Canada. He's currently working as the Vice Provost of Teaching and Learning at Brock University, but he also is the architect behind Canada's first zero textbook cost degree program at KPU in British Columbia. So he has published a lot of the materials that are in my reference list. Open educational practices is a broad descriptor that includes the creation, use, and reuse of OER, but it also includes the co-creation, adaptation, and sharing of teaching practices. So it's newly energized by its relationship to OER and the broader ecosystem of open that we have. So open access, open science, open data, etc., open source. Catherine Cronin in 2018 has shown that educators who adopt open educational practices have the shared values of balancing privacy and openness, developing digital literacies, valuing social learning, and challenging traditional teaching role expectations. So it also includes an openness to the practices of teaching and learning. And so and it also strives to support equitable participation in the creation of knowledge. And it really first came about over the course of a couple different foundational documents, one of them being the Cape Town Open Educational Declaration, which was first published in January of 2008 after a meeting of open education advocates in 2007 from across the world. And this declaration laid out a compelling vision for a world of open, flexible, and effective education that has inspired thousands of educators, learners, advocates, and policymakers across the globe. They have since published another document in 2017 about how that original declaration has gone in the previous 10 years, and we can expect another one hopefully in a couple of years' time. So what we're talking about here is a social and an equitable practice. It shares common investments with many other historical and contemporary schools of pedagogy. For example, critical pedagogy a la Paulo Freire from the Pedagogy of the Oppressed in 1968, constructivist pedagogy, connected learning, and critical digital pedagogy. Those are all recognizable pedagogical strands that overlap with open pedagogy. Experiential learning, I could see another place for a room for experiential learning in this as well. And while open scholarship or open access focuses on equitable access to knowledge, the focus of open pedagogy is equitable participation in the creation of knowledge. Open pedagogy often transforms the student experience within the classroom. It can help students begin to see themselves as scholars and decenters the instructor from the information as the information expert, and moves them towards a facilitation role that supports student negotiation of ideas and transform the efforts of their learning into open knowledge resources. So I have this true or false. When I'm teaching classes about citation and why we have to cite, I have a few true or false questions that I ask them. And one of those is, as a student, you are not allowed to insert your own voice into the scholarly conversations in your field. And I say true or false, right? And then I could do it on Moodle, or not Moodle, Menti, but I do it just like raising hands. And usually every class, I do get students who think that statement is true. So as a student, you are not allowed to insert your own voice into the scholarly conversation. And so I think that if a core goal of scholarship is research, dissemination, and dialogue to further the knowledge base and grow the fields of study, then open pedagogy engages students in this same process within their courses. And it lets them know that their voice is valuable. So here are some features of learner-generated open pedagogy. We have all these words open, like all these words here: planning, products, process, and reflection, plus open. So when it comes to planning, the processes of creating the assignments, the lessons, and reflections are often hidden from public view, but making them open and accessible means that others can learn from them. And open products, students are publishing for an audience greater than their instructor. And this is huge, right? This means that their work has value and outlasts the duration of the course. Their work has the potential to be used for something larger than the course itself and to be part of a larger global conversation. So this changes the experience of doing the work, but just as importantly, it changes the kind of work you might ask your students to do. And then we have open reflection, where we talk and reflect on and make available things that may not have gone well. In addition to things that go well, we have a great body of literature on things that go well in conferences and in published materials like articles, but sometimes the things that don't go well don't make it to that level. And then we talk about open processes. Well, this is the creation of OER sometimes or other open materials. And it's useful to share not just the finished resources, but also the reflections on the process of creating them. And so as we know with experiential learning, that reflection piece is critical for in the whole process of experiential learning, and it's the same here. So talking about how you made a teaching resource, or describing the ways you created the resource in the way you did. So what goals you had, what research underlies the creation of this resource, and whether it was successful. So I have a lot more examples to follow, but in the thread that runs through all of this is what we are giving students is a platform to contribute to the wider world of knowledge on a topic in the Commons in an authentic way, rather than through a series of assignments, which may seem disconnected to a greater purpose or worse, perceived as busy work. As creators of information, students gain a greater understanding of the rights and responsibilities associated with information ownership so that they may make informed decisions about their own intellectual property. So David Wiley put out these terms of disposable assignments versus renewable assignments, and I've kind of gone over that a little bit. He used some pretty strong words to describe disposable assignments, which you could check out if you wanted to. Let me see here. Yeah, I feel like I'm repeating myself a little bit here, so I'm just going to keep going. One of the documents that he has is this chart, which helps you place the assignments that you currently use on the spectrum from open to disposable, or what he calls renewable. And so I don't necessarily like the word artifact here. To me, an artifact is a 3D object that's in a museum, but that's what he uses. So, but it can allow you to see that, okay, maybe you have already assigned material that has value beyond like just the duration of the course. It may or may not be made public, and it may or may not have an open license. So students, if there's any students in the room, we know that students are not empty vessels that need to be filled up with our knowledge that we're giving them. But if you, as a student, have done any of these things, like created and uploaded a video that teaches others how to do something, etc., you've already participated in open learning in some way. And so when I teach students fundamental research skills, I often tell them that they're searching their entire lives. They're searching all the time, and now we just need to apply those things into a academic context. And voila. The work that the students do as part of their studies has value, and sharing the work with others is part of academic scholarship. And we're enabling them to contribute to the building and sharing of knowledge. So your mileage may vary. This may be brand new to you today. You may decide as an educator that you may start small, right? You may start by exploring what openly licensed material is out there to assign as readings instead of using a textbook that costs money. Or you may go all the way to the end of this slide here, which is where that course itself is open to participants outside of the institution. So that's a little broad, right? But it's, your mileage may vary. Open educational practice is a term that can cover any open teaching and learning activities, and baby steps are indeed possible. So here are some examples that I came up with. Often when we talk about this topic, it's also like the open pedagogy is used interchangeably with OER-enabled pedagogy. And so with OER itself, with the creation of textbooks or open educational resources, there are a lot of activities that can happen. Probably originally we think of these as students as authors of the textbook for their next course, but students could also be updating a textbook. Like if there's a macroeconomics textbook, the theories behind macroeconomics might not change every year, but maybe you want to include some up-to-date stats from StatCan on unemployment, for example. There are lots of activities that can go along with the creation and use and reuse of OER. I think book reviews could be another activity along this lens. So analyzing textbooks through a certain lens, like a social justice lens, publishing reviews in an OER format. So that's sort of adjacent to the use of a textbook. Or annotating those OER using a social annotation software like Hypothesis, where students provided examples from their own life in concepts taught in a social psychology class, for example. There's other mediums, of course, and I'm going to talk about those as well, but a podcast series where students explain high-level scientific concepts to a broad audience in plain English, or many other types of knowledge translation activities. Creative performances and exhibitions of student work. So I've worked with some profs who are now assigning photo voice assignments. Why not put those photos on display in an art space, like at the library? And then we have institutional repositories, and they accept multiple file formats. And so I would be remiss not to mention ours. So here are the links for the different institutional repositories in the Maple League. I myself am working now to manage the one at St. FX called St. FX Scholar. And then there's Acadia Scholar, the Mount A Digital Repository, and Iris, which is definitely the most creative name in these four, for Bishop's University. So you can see here, this screenshot was taken yesterday from our Research and Creative Works collection within St. FX Scholar, and we have room to accept undergraduate student research and creative works and graduate research and creative works. We often consider our institutional repositories as a place to store our digital theses, but there's so much more available through those. In addition to theses, and in multiple file formats. Like you can see there are 2 videos here. Audio files are accepted as well. I could see a lot of different applications of this. Oral history projects where students are recording interviews with international students, for example, talking about their experiences. Anything to do with digital collections, like archival digital collections, there's a lot of possibility. All right, so now I'm going to flip over and talk a little bit about Wikipedia as another place to consider an approach to open pedagogy. And I'll start with a little bit of a background on Wikipedia just to ground ourselves and to remind ourselves about the fact that it began about 25 years ago, almost exactly in January of 2001. But before that, it was launched as Newpedia in 2000. And it was meant to be a multilingual online encyclopedia whose articles were written by subject matter expert volunteers and reviewed by expert editors before publication. So similar to the peer review process in scholarly journal articles, right? This was a laborious and time-consuming process, and so they eventually decided to switch it over to making it a publicly, like where the public could contribute articles. The content was openly licensed, but the review process was too slow from the very beginning. So Wikipedia was a new and improved version, and it came out just a year after. Wikipedia as an information source and a community of editors co-creating public knowledge is what we have today. However, soon around that time when it launched, when articles were reviewed after publication and by the general public, there were quite a few negative messages that emerged and might still exist about Wikipedia from teachers and instructors, especially at the K-12 level. And this pushed the student use of Wikipedia underground. So sometimes now students arriving at the university have little to no understanding of how Wikipedia works. But it may not always be the case. I feel like the community, like Wikipedia itself, responded with a whole series of checks and balances that ensure quality material is published on that platform. And today, this was the main reason I wanted to include this slide, is that we need to remember that Wikipedia now is older than most undergraduate university students, so this has always been a part of their digital lives. And of course, as we know, that there are multiple linguistic versions available. In 2002, there were 329 language editions, and today there are more than 7 million articles in English. So Wikipedia operates on fundamental principles known as the 5 pillars, and these pillars, plus the other built-in checks and balances of Wikipedia, can offer librarians and faculty a framework for information literacy instruction. So it's an encyclopedia. It combines many features of a general and specialized encyclopedia or almanac or gazetteer. It's not a soapbox or an advertising platform or a social network or a vanity press or even an experiment in anarchy or democracy. It's not an indiscriminate collection of information, nor is it a web directory. So that's what it is. It's what we call a tertiary source in the library world. Neutrality, it has preference for an impartial tone in the articles, and articles document and explain major points of view rather than giving opinions. They avoid advocacy. Opposing points of view should be presented accurately and in context. All articles must strive for accuracy with citations from reliable sources, especially when it concerns a living person or if it's a controversial topic. So there's an open license where no editor owns the article. Instead, we have contributors. And etiquette is encouraged to act in good faith and assume good faith on the part of others. And they want you to be bold but not reckless in updating articles. And the best part is we don't have to agonize over making mistakes. They can be corrected easily because almost every version of every article is saved. There's so much documentation on Wikipedia that it can be very overwhelming. And that's another reason I wanted to present this to you here, to really simplify it if you're new to the whole idea. So this is another thing that I learned about Wikipedia, was that it's actually, each linguistic version is not a translation one of the other, that depending on the language, the authors may choose to present the same information in slightly different ways. So here I have an example from I've been watching the Great Canadian Baking series lately, and there's a Newfoundland um, baker on there this time for this season, and she's been pushing out all the Newfoundland dishes. Not that there are that many, but Towton is one of them that she's been using. Anyway, so I was inspired by that to include this idea here. But you can see already from these two versions in English and French of this like super basic fry bread, that they've chosen to use different photos, and they have used different languages, like different words to describe the same thing. When it comes to your own open pedagogy project, I do see a lot of potential here. So, of course, anything that's been traditionally underrepresented, like a biography of a person, I think that's a really good starting place. Language learning, likewise, is another great area to explore. So, any second language learning or third language learning. Anything that's local and contextual, local history, especially when it comes to any kind of underrepresented group, nature-based project, anything extremely local, and then representation, like media representation analysis as well. So you don't have to always, it doesn't have to be a case where students are uploading and creating entirely new articles, although I do have a few slides about places to go for inspiration for that. But projects related to Wikipedia can include simply editing or adding a citation. Creating a page, though, it does allow students to engage with the Wikipedia community. There's actually a huge population behind Wikipedia that are kind of ready to edit the articles as they get uploaded, and it happens a lot more quickly than you can expect. So it's quite similar to the peer review process, actually. Wikipedia provides the platform for a powerful teaching tool for the development of a wide range of research-related and digital skills for this century. It's an active and collaborative pedagogical approach which encourages the development of a host of student skills like information literacy, critical thinking, media literacy, collaboration, online communication, writing, and critical digital literacy skills. The assignments hold students accountable to the readers of Wikipedia for their work. And rather than merely writing an essay that will only be read by the professor or a teaching assistant, their Wikipedia article can potentially be read by a global audience for years into the future. And my friend, Dr. Becky McMillan, she currently works for Canada's International Development Research Centre on food policy. She's also a former part-time academic instructor at St. FX in the Climate and Environment program. And I told her about this. She said that Wikipedia can be a powerful tool to harness for information rather than disinformation. Example, some of my colleagues have been using it with their Global South research partners, like doing mass events where they populate it with information from Southern-based research to counter Northern bias and popularize their findings. So I think it engages students in complex conversations about this information source, but also all information sources, all publishing, and it improves information literacy skills along the way. So, like I said, I have a few slides here that talk about the community spaces and the background checks and balances that might encourage your students. So they have a lot of thematic project pages that could guide students in their selection of content to edit or to create a new article for, to provide inspiration and additional context for your project. So you can use the project pages to find reference sources on a topic in question, or to help you source your articles, and to get information on writing conventions related to the theme that you're interested in. Many project pages will include instruction on a particular template to use in the actual writing, an HTML template. And these community spaces within Wikipedia remind us that knowledge consumption and knowledge creation are not separate but parallel processes. So this Women in Red is just one example of a community space where the Women in Red project focuses on reducing systemic bias regarding gender representation in the Wikipedia movement. Their goal is to move the needle in terms of statistical representation of women and other gender minorities in Wikipedia. They recognized the need for this work in 2014 when they learned that only 15% of English Wikipedia's biographies were about women. But by mid-December 2024, women's biographies on the English Wikipedia were about 20%. So there's still a lot of work to be done in this area. But one thing that this project does, and it does with other similar projects as well, is it gives you a list of articles that would be nice to have, right? And so this is missing articles just for Canadian women. And I think that it's important to remember, that these tools have been around for a little while, and discussions like this one are important today because we're living in an increasingly polarized world. And we have an opportunity here to dig deep and stand our ground when it comes to presenting clear, accurate, and current information online that does not ignore the advancements of equity-deserving groups, but which further promotes the presence of women as Wikipedians, as writers, editors, and contributors. So according to Wikipedia, they want you to use sources that will be familiar to anyone who teaches students how to do research. So they're listed here. And they consider an authoritative source according to the document type, especially so the peer-reviewed academic journals are at the top. They have more weight than a daily newspaper article. According to the author's credentials, where did they get their authority, right? So this is familiar to you guys. If you've had a librarian in your class or if you've taught students how to do research, you've heard these things. So according to the publication date, of course, depending on discipline, but an outdated source can be considered obsolete. And the source's language is less important than its quality. So self-published sources are generally not regarded as reliable. And information in an article must be verifiable in the references cited. So this is important to know. I did an activity where I worked with a modern languages prof last March, and we had students create biographies in French, like French Canadians. And, even though they were in third year, they didn't know that your in-text citation had to correspond with your reference list entry. So little things like that, maybe it didn't get caught elsewhere, but Wikipedia caught it, of all places. So, so they have further guidance on passages that are open to multiple interpretations, should be precisely cited or avoided, summarizing material, drawing conclusions. So they have guidance on all that and how to, it also helps your students develop good writing skills. Wikipedia articles, they prefer you to have a good summary at the top, so it does follow along with a lot of the types of research skills and writing skills that you would like your students to develop. These screenshots here were taken from at the end of last May, but Wikipedia often has events like these going on where they regularly engage participants to populate the encyclopedia on different thematic topics. And these events are actually how I got introduced to the whole idea of editing a Wikipedia page. They have a contest sort of called One Lib, One Ref, where librarians can edit sources, and the librarian who edits the most within a certain period of time in January and February wins a trip to New York for a conference related to Wikipedia.
To do this, we
okay, I don't know. This is only a minute long.
need the help of instructors like
Sorry. I just wanted to point out that in Canada and the US, Wiki Education is actually there for you as a faculty member. They are facilitating assignments related to Wikipedia in higher education through their Wikipedia student program. which provides specialized curriculum that guides students in editing Wikipedia with online modules. So they already have everything set up and you have access to it as a Canadian faculty member and instructor. So instructors and students track progress through an online dashboard as modules are completed and Wikipedia contributions in the instructor's area of subject expertise are added. So Wiki Education has so far facilitated the contributions of about 91,000 students since 2010. But I want to say as well that open is not the opposite of private. So in Open Pedagogy, students can also choose not to openly license their work, but I think what the whole point is that they're learning about intellectual property and copyright in a constructive way. And then they're making their own decisions based on their learning and their output. Like education students, for example, teacher candidates, they might not want to share a lesson plan until they've had a chance to actually practice that in person. But the main point is that we're allowing them the agency to decide on that. And so this screenshot is here just to show you what information Wikipedia would want from you just to create an account. And it's basically you create a username and your password, and that's really it. And they have some guidance on around respectful usernames, but it's not a huge amount of information that's collected personally. And so I do have some ideas about ways that the library can further support OEP. I think that, in our 4 institutions, we have a liaison librarian model. So I myself work with 8 departments and programs at St. FX, and I provide information literacy instruction. I manage the collection. There's a whole list of things we do. But I think liaison librarians could work directly with faculty to develop renewable assignments, to instruct on Creative Commons licensing and copyright and intellectual property, to instruct on the use of Pressbooks if that's available to you. It's a Canadian product. I think there's a lot of great things about it. To share new and high quality OER, and to enhance the discoverability of OER on campus through the catalog and MARC records if possible, with LibGuides that promote OER, with a review process for open textbooks, and then to take it a step further, to bake open educational practices into strategic planning, or to nudge open educational practices in certain ways. So intellectual property procedures where faculty are encouraged to create and adapt OER or publish in open access outlets. So there's a lot there, including a search for OER in a new course proposal or a course review. Just looking, not adopting necessarily, just looking for them. Incorporating a column on the course timetable to indicate whether courses have 0 textbook costs or low textbook costs. And then moving the dial in the tenure and promotion procedure to include language that recognizes and supports the development of OER. So this is a reminder, I have one more slide after this, that all of this is a collaborative effort, and librarians are here to help, but there's also instructional designers and colleagues from other institutions and a broader community in which you live. So it's not something you have to do by yourself. And this here is the OER world map. I'm not sure how often it's used these days, but you can see that it's going on all over the world. And it's just good for a visual cue, right? And a reminder. Okay, so I don't know how much time, about 10 minutes or so, but I have some discussion questions. If we'd like to, there's also a reference list on Zotero. I can send you that link if you email me later on. But yeah, so please, I want to hear your reactions if you have anything you'd like to include in this discussion.
So we have had a very active chat.
Okay.
I probably didn't get a chance to look at it, but we have a few minutes. So would somebody from the chat like to ask a question? Or, not from the chat, but just go ahead and mute or raise your hand. Any comments? Okay, so it was shared on the chat that Wikipedia is under constant attack, intensifying in 2025. On October 27, Musk launches Grokipedia. I didn't know about this.
No, me neither.
And the link is there. But apparently Elon Musk launches own version of Wikipedia set to fact-checked by AI. Controlling what gets written is a way to gain or keep power. And we have an article on disturbing ways in which this new Wikipedia is being used.
Yeah, that's brand new news, only 2 days ago.
Yes, so that
Yeah.
I didn't know about, so
Yeah.
I'll follow that.
Yeah.
There are a couple of questions here. One is the technical minor question. Where does the term constructionist or the slide about disposable to reusable assignments come from?
Oh, yeah. So I have a citation there. It's one of the, yeah, let me see if I can find it.
I mean, it sounds similar to constructivist, but obviously has a significantly different meaning. So I'm just kind of wondering what the background of the term is. Not necessarily like the citation, but like how did it get developed?
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I'm sorry. I just read about it in the article that where they promoted reusable assignments. But I can give you the actual citation. I'm sure they talk about it in more depth there. I don't have a huge background in pedagogical history or anything, so there could be others in the room that know more than I do.
And the other question that was there from Eva was, can you talk more about the interactions between having students make publicly available work and student safety, not just the topics or evidences that are, or student anxieties? So it's a longer question, but can talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that's important to consider. And also we don't want to, so it is like a fine line where we don't want to consider this work to be extractive of student, oh, we're here to get your, like we're not, that's not the goal. It's more about getting that relationship established and then allowing students the choice and like allowing them to understand fully about open licensing. I mean, open licensing is everywhere these days. Yesterday I was at a talk by a Nobel laureate, no, like a Nobel Peace Prize winner at St. FX, and he had some slides on there from the World Bank, and they were open, like they had a CC license on them. So I think that these licenses are all around us, and I think it's important for us to instruct on them and what they're all about. And so there is more to read about that. We don't want it to be an extractive approach. We don't want it, with student anxiety, like we want to address that, right? We want to build the relationship where they're doing things confidently. So there is definitely some ethical considerations in there as well.
Yeah, I'm also thinking like, so Wikipedia has some protections in terms of their processes and also the authorship or editorship of articles on Wikipedia. Like you have to kind of go digging to find it, so it's not as immediately evident as like doing a podcast that's put on YouTube or something like that. But I'm thinking about like the potential for online harassment against especially like women students or minoritized students. And how that impacts their academic experience, their safety, their willingness to participate in such a thing, and if that's kind of setting up an obstacle between different groups of our students.
Absolutely. And I mean, you're going to integrate this if you do it all or already do in a way that works with your intuition, right? So you can't ignore those things that you just said. I do think that most students a lot of us are on social media, so maybe it opens up a room for a conversation on the topic. But absolutely, we want to avoid that where if a student publishes their work online, they're getting harassed. We absolutely want to avoid that.
Are there like general principles suggested in the open pedagogy literature, for example, though?
Well, yeah, there was one article, or sorry, it was a chapter of an OER textbook actually. So, that sort of got at what you're saying. And I had this tab open right before I started this talk and I closed it. But if I can find it again.
Maybe Juan Carlos could send that along to everybody later too, if you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes,
don't
we
want to put you
are.
on the
It's
spot.
something
I'm finding it right now.
absolutely. People are thinking about that. And I should say that, with this field, because it's open, there's actually quite a bit to sift through. So that Zotero library I shared, it has all the sources, not all of them. It has a lot that I looked at. I don't know how in depth I looked at all of this, but I came across it and thought it was useful. So I encourage you to check those out. But if this particular textbook is from the University of Saskatchewan, and it was written by a librarian, but it talks about yeah, I might have to take a minute and find it after.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then my third question was, of course, as instructors, we're kind of thinking ahead to like, okay, how do I assess student work? Were there any examples that you came across that tied student creative work that's kind of put out in public to specific course learning objectives that would kind of help us tie together, right? Because if we've got a learning objective that this activity is meeting, then we know like what are we assessing for when we're looking at the student work. Do you have any examples along those lines?
No, I think that they would be similar to what you would assess for anyway, honestly. I don't think it would change.
There is a comment on the chat on Agnieszka, thank you. So from what I've seen in what is being practiced with these types of assignments, students can choose if they agree to publish the work online or it's just for the professor, so they can still get the assignment done without it going online publicly, so they can protect their personal experiences, identity, etc.
Yeah, and in Wikipedia, everything is created in draft mode first and then before it's published. So a student could, and this is one thing I encountered with the one prof from Modern Languages that I collaborated with last March is, yeah, we had them submit the draft as their assignment. But then what we quickly realized was that the Wikipedia community responded very quickly to their published materials. And it was surprising, actually. We didn't realize that it would have been so active on there. So yeah, it was, but the draft mode is helpful for that so that the prof can have a chance to look at it there before and give feedback before it goes to a wider audience.
So we are at the top of the hour, so I'm going to stop the recording, but by all means, you're welcome to stay a bit longer if you have any other questions or what have you. Thank you very much, Sam. Thank you for joining us. And as I said, I'm formally stopping the recording, but we can hang out a bit longer if you so desire.